Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is what the MCU needs. I finally went to a movie theater to watch films, after 2 years of not going to the movie theaters. And I'm glad the first film I saw in a drive-in theater was Shang-Chi. I want to get one thing straight before I continue. I'm Asian. I have been my whole life. Therefore, I want to give an unbiased perspective on this film that represents the Asian community. Shang-Chi is great. It's awesome. It's a film that was needed in a franchise that was starting to feel the same with every film releasing year by year. I talked about how the Disney Plus Marvel shows were starting to change the image of the MCU, and that was great. We were getting more character-driven stories. But that was not the case for its films. If the MCU was truly going to change, they would need to start immediately in Phase 4. And although Black Widow was still the same formulaic cash grab that we've seen in a few of Marvel's films, Shang-Chi is the start of a new era for films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Spoilers for Shang-Chi, because I'm about to talk about some stuff that I did not like. Wait, before you go into the comments, I want to say that I love Shang-Chi. It was great and awesome, and this is mostly a positive video. Therefore, I want to get the negative stuff out of the way so that we can talk about what I loved. I thought the pacing in the second act of the movie went too fast, and because of that, everything felt rushed when it came to the village of Ta Lao. I felt we needed to spend more time in Ta Lao in order to really help cement Shang's arc in the film. It felt incomplete when Shang finally got the 10 rings because I felt like there was something missing in order to really cap off his arc. He was still a likable, great character, however, so that was still great. Shang's sister had nothing to do in this film, and yes, she isn't the main character, but someone like Kate got one of the best arcs of the film. Therefore, I felt they could have done something with her. I do hope there is more of her in the future because she has the potential to be one of the most badass characters in the MCU. And my last problem that I had with this film was Trevor. Aren't you glad I gave you a spoiler warning? I felt he overstayed his welcome in the film, and maybe he should have been incorporated less? Anyways, that's all the problems I actually had with the film, so let's get on to what I loved. Despite the fact that I wish he had more parts to add to his story in order to really help cement his arc, Shang-Chi is still a great protagonist. In any film, it doesn't matter whether it's a cartoon or Tarantino film, it's very important that you have a great protagonist, and Shang-Chi does not fail. Simu Liu plays Shang with the much needed charisma to play any character in the MCU. I thought his fight scenes were really great and dynamic. His dynamic with Awkwafina was also really great. And while I'm on the topic of the character Kate for a moment, I'm so glad they were just friends. Anytime there are male or female protagonists, there always has to be a forced romantic subplot between the two of them, and it sometimes just falls flat and doesn't feel genuine at all. I'm not saying they'll never date, I'm just saying it's a good thing that for the first Shang-Chi movie in this possible trilogy, that they are only friends. For now. I'm also going to keep talking about Kate because I think she has one of the best arcs of the film. The theme is really relatable to people finding out what they want in life. Her arc is really all about coming out of your safe space, not hiding and aiming towards a goal. Because if you never aim, you'll never hit the targets. I thought that was a really great message to those who don't have a clue on what to do with their life. And I'm glad Awkwafina had that role instead of only being the comedic relief, which she still was at times. I also really enjoyed Shang's dynamic with his father. It felt like a real boy talking about the loss of his mother with his dad, who is also going through that same pain. But his father doesn't know how to cope through it, leading him to continue using the power of the 10 rings to feel secure. I think one of the best part about Shang's character was that, unlike his father, when he possessed the 10 rings, he could have done anything. He could have used the power to kill his father like he said he would. But instead, he drops the rings and chose love and family over power and anger. While I'm talking about the Mandarin and the 10 rings, Tony Leung was the standout part of Shang-Chi. They could have easily made him this terrible father who was cold-hearted and needed to be stopped, and they would have been able to get away with it, especially with the fact that they had Tony Leung playing their villain. But I'm really glad they went the route of making him a compelling antagonist with understandable goals and a great conviction. Earlier I talked about how sick I am of romantic subplots in superhero films that feel forced. I don't think that's the case with Shang-Chi's parents. The Mandarin starts off as this typical villain who wants power and to rule the world. but his life changes when he meets a woman that makes him see life from a totally different view. I mentioned that the pacing in the second act feels too fast, but there's this one scene in the film where we get a flashback of him living a normal life with his family, and it feels real. He gives up the 10 rings to live a normal life, and when we see it all be taken away from him, we feel his loss, we feel his guilt. That scene of him and Shang going to the hideout of the gang that killed his wife was one of the best scenes of the film, because it truly showcases the true horrifying nature of the Mandarin and the power of the 10 rings. Not only do we the audience witness this, but the young Shang-chi, after losing his mother, witnesses for the first time in his life the horrifying cold nature of the man he calls his father. That's brilliant. I love the way this scene was directed, and I love Tony Leung's acting. The Mandarin is fueled by power, desire, and guilt that he forgets what's truly important. By the time the final act comes around, Shang and his father's fight and dialogue was executed perfectly by Liu and Leung. It felt like a real conversation between father and son that were experiencing the same grief. I think the final scene of the Mandarin giving the 10 rings to his son is meant to be a metaphor for him finally choosing family instead of power, love instead of hatred and loneliness. And his final scene is what helps cement the Mandarin as one of the MCU's most memorable villains. I thought the filmmaking was on another level, especially the camera work and fight scenes. When I went to go watch Shang-Chi, one of the expectations I had for the film was good fight scenes, some shots to be a one take for at least 20 seconds. I think the fighting really takes center stage in the first half of the film. You can really feel every punch being thrown, especially on the bus, which is probably the best fight scene of the entire movie, on par with the fight scene in Vegas. I think we need to give credit to director Destin Daniel Cretton and cinematographer Bill Pope for not making this feel like a Marvel film. I've critiqued in the past that most MCU films feel the same direction, effects, color, and jokes that didn't always land. Although Shang-Chi still suffers from the usual MCU tropes and formula, it still tries to be different than the other films that we've gotten in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I can appreciate. It shows that Marvel is starting to let directors do what they want with their own vision. And it looks like this is the start of a new era for the MCU and its relationship with their directors. Overall, Shang-Chi isn't a perfect film. It has flaws that you wish weren't there. However, those flaws don't drag the film down a whole lot, and it would definitely still be an enjoyable watch. Shang-Chi is exactly what most MCU films need to be in Phase 4, with the exception of Spider-Man. We need more solo character-driven films that aren't connected to the bigger MCU world. Most fans will go for a good watch and to be entertained, and that's fine. But the true MCU fans won't go to these movies because it's only a crossover with references from other MCU flicks, but because they want to see stories that are in service of the character, not the other way around.